Why might one wine remind you of Gwyneth Paltrow and another brings to mind Penelope Cruz? How can a neurotoxin preservative legally end up in natural wine without being listed on the label? And why would a three-star Michelin chef insist on pairing a complex tasting menu dish with nothing but a glass of water? Well, if you're watching this video on the replay, please get into the comments and type the word replay and let me know where you're logging in from. I want to hear from you. And of course, if you're here on the live stream, please get into the comments. I'm Natalie McLean and I teach online food and wine pairing classes. And You've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, before I introduce our guest, I want to say that three of you are going to win a copy of her terrific new book, Smart Mouth, Wine Essentials for You, Me, and Everyone We Know, who's just been selected as one of the 4 best wine books of the year by Eric Asimov in the New York Times. Wow. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you want to win a copy. I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. Jordan Salcito is an award-winning sommelier, author, and entrepreneur. She has worked for more than a decade as a sommelier at top-notch restaurants, including Momofuku, Restaurant Daniel, and 11 Madison Park, where she was part of the team to win the Outstanding Wine Service from the James Beard Foundation. Her wine programs at Momofuku were regularly recognized in the New York Times, Eater, Food and Wine, and were named the most creative wine list in the world by the World of Fine Wine magazine. Wow. Jordan passed the tasting portion of the Master Sommelier exam on her first attempt and worked harvests at world-renowned wineries in Burgundy, Tuscany, California, and Patagonia. Jordan is a pioneer of the ready-to-drink beverage category with her organic Italian spritz company, Drink Ramona. And she has just published her first book, as I mentioned, Smart Mouth. And she joins us now from her home in Paris. Jordan, we're so glad to have you here with us. Welcome.
Natalie, thank you so much for that incredible intro and for having me on the show. I'm
Wow.
very honored to be here.
Our pleasure. Wow. Things are really lighting up in your world, and deservedly so. So let's start, though, at the beginning. How did your father's memories of making wine with his grandfather in the basement of their Connecticut home spark your own interest in wine?
My goodness, for me, that was the sort of first, I guess, exposure to wine. Even as a child, my father, whom I never met his father, but whose dad died when he was young, would talk about this one memory, and it was sort of the only memory that he has held on to. And so I always associated wine with family and connection and a thing you do together. And I grew up, far away from any vineyards. I grew up in Denver, and there are quite a number of wineries there now. All 50 states have wineries. That was certainly not a part of my childhood in any way, and yet there was a familiarity, and I think that sparked my curiosity because it was sort of like, okay, wine is this connective tissue that was interesting to me from that early age.
I so resonate with that, Jordan. I called dining out our family sport. We weren't on the LL Bean catalog with puffy vests, but we got out to dinner once a week. I don't know if my son enjoyed it so much, but anyway, he remembers that too. You write about moving into a windowless room above the headquarters of the motorcycle gang Hells Angels in New York City 3 months after college. We're jumping ahead, of course, now. What was running through your mind? How are you feeling as your parents help you move in?
I feel like what I was thinking then at the time was, I knew ever since I visited New York. I think I was about 13, and my dad wanted to take my family, so we all went, and I just connected with it. I fell in love with it, and I was like, I'm gonna move here someday. Someday I'm gonna live in New York. And I just knew that on some sort of cellular level. And so I remember, the thing I remember is that he was crying, and I've never seen my dad cry. And
Oh,
and then that was when it sort of occurred to me, like, oh, maybe this is not, yeah, I mean, it's, I was out of my bubble of my liberal arts college education and my, beautiful, so I was sort of all of a sudden out of out of the bubble of comfort, and I don't think I had any idea what I was actually getting into. Um, so I was not as traumatized as I should have been. It was more just like, okay, this is interesting. Oh, that's what a cockroach looks like. Okay, now I know. Like now I've seen one in real life. So it was that sort of like before it all settles in, where you're in that sort of liminal space between your old life and your new life, and you don't, for me at least, sometimes I don't register the signs, whether they're good or bad, until I've had more time to process them. So I think that was that sort of moment right there.
Wow. So you ran into some cockroaches. Did you run into any Hell's Angels members?
They always would gather. They would like hang out, and I was not, I was not like part of the crew, but in a way, it was like, okay, this is a safe block. Like no one's gonna mess around with the Hells Angels, and so there was that aspect that was interesting. I do remember we had a mouse in the apartment as well for a time. I'd forgotten that. My mom reminded me recently. She's like, "You remember you also had the mouse in that room." Yes, it was not an ideal scenario by any means.
Sounds relatively tame, though.
Yeah,
Mice and cockroaches in a
totally.
relatively, quote, safe area of town.
Hey, that could have been worse.
It could. So tell us now, let's jump right into your restaurant experience. That moment at Daniel Boulud's Michelin star restaurant kitchen, you are carrying the out of print cookbook, Great French Chefs. He walks in with a decanter of 1990 Domaine Jean-Louis Chavet, Hermitage Rouge. Tell us about that.
Goodness, you have really read this book, and you've really done your homework. Thank
My
you so
pleasure.
much. That was such a surreal moment because at that point I had worked in the kitchen for I think about 4 months. The first 3 months were in the basement, so I think it's been remodeled now. But when I was there, the stagiaires start at the bottom, like literally the bottom of the building, and you're in this big giant restaurant building basement that is an ecosystem in and of itself. And there was Lupe the butcher who like ran the stock pots, and it was very important to like make sure that you were super nice to Lupe and took care of his team and brought donuts on Sundays and that kind of thing. And then once I got the hang of that, I remember I came in on my day off one day, and I said, "Can I just watch? I make the things that end up on plates during service, but I never see that. Is it? Can I just stay one day for service?" And that I think was just it's a good reminder that just putting in the effort gets you noticed. And I think once I did that, I was on Danielle's radar a little bit more. And then, that world, it's probably the same now, but Danielle just attracts such a global, diverse group of people. I remember everyone's nickname was the country where they were from. So there was Elder, who was from Spain, and there was Michael, and he was from Ireland, and there was the other Michael, who was from England. So it was like Irish, Spanish, English, like that. That was everyone's nickname. And at this time, and then as a result, there was also just so much sort of sharing of information and so much curiosity. And somebody, I don't remember who, had suggested I go check out this bookstore called Bonnie Slotnick Cookbooks, where you can get all these out of print old cookbooks in the West Village. So I did that one Sunday on a day off and ended up with this cookbook called Great French Chefs. And it was just sort of, I guess there are a few moments where it's like you can't plan it, like the universe maybe has some bigger plan, and that was an example of that. So I ended up with this book, and I think maybe I got something else too, but this was a book that I brought in to the restaurant, and people were bringing in books a lot. People were always sort of sharing what they've learned or different inspirations. And I bring this book in, and I had it with me, and I did not expect to see Danielle. But at that point, I think he had seen me working in his kitchen enough, and whenever he did, I was focused and doing a good job. And then I was walking by to get a pastry because like the pastry team would leave the extra pastries after service, and I would sometimes snack on them before walking home. And Danielle walked in at this moment, and I happened to be carrying the book, and that was what caught his eye. And so he was like,
Really? He was familiar with the cookbook?
he just was interested in an old looking book, and that was him. Like that was him. That was also the sous chef, Jean-Francois, of the kitchen. We called him JFK. There was Jean-Francois Bruel, who was the pastry chef, and yeah. So it was just, he was sort of like, "What is okay? Who are you? Like, I've seen you around. What do you do in my kitchen? What's this book?" And I, at the time, I had now graduated up to the garde manger station. So now I got to work in the kitchen at service every night on the garde manger, making the sort of those first bites that people receive when they sit down. And but then in the middle of service, my job would shift, and there were just a few people who could do this, and I had been trained on it, and I was good enough to continue doing it. But basically, you had to weave. It's like weaving these strips of potato scales around a black bass fish fillet.
What are scales, potato scales?
Yes. So, okay. So there's behind the fish station, there was a prosciutto slicer.
Okay.
And one of the fish cooks during the day would prep Idaho russet potatoes, like de-skin them and turn them into the shape of like a strip, sort of like that. So like an oval, like almost like
strip.
like a strip of ribbon, but with rounded edges.
Oh,
And then, like, I had next to me a clarified butter bowl. I had the potato slicer, so I would have to slice the potatoes a certain thickness and then weave them around the paupiette, this black bass paupiette, and then brush it with clarified butter and do like as many as I could on a sheet tray, put it back in the fridge. And they had like a maybe 20, 30-minute shelf life. And so it was
wow.
sort of this, but this was the signature dish. So it was like these paupiettes would get seared in a pan with butter, and it would look like a fish, sort of, in the end. These scales of potato, which were really basically just crispy.
Okay.
Yes, and so the starch from the potato then meets the clarified butter in the pan, and then it turns this great golden brown, and it's sort of like eating not a French fry, but that sort of crisp potato buttery deliciousness. And
Sounds
so
great.
it was an amazing dish. I don't know if it's still on or not. I knew it came off for a while. And then it was served with a red wine sauce of reduced Syrah with thyme and butter. And the Syrah was from the Northern Rhone. And so it was just this very, very, very synergistic moment of him noticing me, asking about this book. I happen to be there and have this book. He happens to have a decanter of the 1990 Shah of Hermitage, which is a red wine made from the Syrah grape. And then that just sort of, he sees the book and he takes it and he starts flipping through it. And in a couple of seconds, he's found this page and he lights up, and it's a page of of the red mullet with these tiny little circular potato scales, which is the dish that he made when he went to train with and learn from Paul Bocuse in Lyon before Daniel then returned to New York and opened Restaurant Daniel.
So it's the inspiration for his signature dish.
Inspiration dish for the signature dish, which I was then now preparing. And he's drinking this amazing bottle of wine that happens to be the same grape in the sauce. That it's just
Holy convergence.
exactly. And I don't even think I realized all of it at the time, but like within the next few days, it was sort of like that was quite wild. But ever since then, then I think Danielle just sort of, he made sure that if there was a wine event happening, he would let me know about it. And during this time, I had started dating the man who I've now been married to for 17 years, a man named Robert Bohr, who
Famous sommelier.
He's so talented, and he was the wine director and managing partner at a restaurant called Crew at the time, which had this.
And that had I was there, biblical, several Bibles of wine lists. It was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I actually had not to name drop, but with Jay McInerney for my second book. And we just ordered and kept ordering, and it was Robert who served us. It was crazy, the wines. Just off the charts. Not just expensive, but really, unearthly. I remember a Jura wine, and that was Jay's favorite. Yes. Anyway, down a rabbit hole there.
Too. So you've had these iconic wine moments as well. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. So what did that Rhone wine taste like to you?
For me, it was, the way I remember it was like black pepper and leather and bacon and smoke and a little bit of pastrami and meat and
Why the
red.
pastrami? What's the
Well,
connection with the pastrami?
I think it's that black pepper, that sort of
Ah,
like gamey black pepper. For me, that's I've just always registered it, and I now don't really eat very much pastrami, but certainly not here in France. But even in New York, I think
sure.
the last time I had a pastrami sandwich was over a decade ago. But I don't know. It's just it has that very pronounced gamey but black peppery smell that is, yeah, that always reminds me of a pastrami sandwich.
And did that moment affect how you saw or how you viewed wine and food pairing? Or was it the start of how you started to view pairings?
Definitely the start. And that would have been around the same time that I would have been like on my days off, I would go to crew, and then I would have a similar kind of experience. I mean, not always, and certainly not with Danielle, but the sort of access to those special wines, and because you were at crew too, and that I think that moment in New York was that was just like the moment where I happened to be learning about wine, and I feel so lucky that was the case, because now these wines, when I want to buy them on a wine list, they're 10 times the price of what they were back then, and so that part I lament, but I also am so grateful for those reference points, because now it's like once you have that kind of moment, and now those particular wines are so expensive, but there are others that are not, that are still amazing finds. For me, like the Enminate wines from Spain are so soulful, and that's, I mean, now those prices are in the $100 and $200 a bottle, but you can still find that are some that are sub 100, and just a couple years ago it was like $50 a bottle, and that's always happening. And, it's
It's
sort of
true.
like,
As they
who
get
cares?
discovered. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And what does a soulful wine mean to you? How, I know it's hard to describe, but what does a soulful wine have?
Yeah. All right. For me, it's like a wine where I feel it in my bones, like a wine where I take a sip and I'm transported, and it's a moment where you're sort of one with the philosophy of whoever it was making this wine, and presumably anyone who's doing a great job like that is also like deeply respectful of the land. And I think that is one of the things that I do think, and of course we it's taboo, or not taboo, but it's sort of passe to say old world and new world. But one of the things that I loved in researching this book and writing this book was this, there's a Jancis Robinson definition, and she ties it to technology, and she says, of course, in fact, the like old world, new world is technically any country making wine after the 14th century, which is sort of wild to think that that's new
New.
world. New,
Yeah.
exactly. But basically, that was colonization, or maybe it's 15th century, but basically colonization. But really, it's also technology, like what has happened, and the way that it sort of has manifested today is there's a new world approach of, okay, I want to craft a wine. Though, yeah, I guess it almost can also be summed up by the word for winemaker, which doesn't exist in France. The winemaker, the word is vigneron, or vine grower. And so
Right.
you have,
It's not about ego. It's just,
yes,
it's about the
exactly.
vines. You
You're
are
not
a servant of the
making,
vines. Yeah.
exactly, you're not making the wine. Like grapes are going to ferment whether or
Vines
not.
make the wine or the grapes.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And so
Wow.
there's this sort of reverence to place, and to expressing that place, and to the viticulture and the growing of the vine without all this intervention.
Right. And
And
that's probably why on old world labels they're putting place, not grapes,
yes,
right?
exactly
Yeah.
right. Exactly right.
Okay. Yeah. It's about the place. The place does it all, or most of the work, the heavy
Yes,
lifting.
exactly.
So you worked harvest in some of Burgundy's most legendary estates, including Domaine du Jacques, Comte Liger Billard. Oh, my French is bad. And Domaine d'Arlot. The 2006 harvest at Domaine Largeau you described as an epiphany that sealed the deal for my wine career. What specifically happened during that harvest that you couldn't have learned, say, in a restaurant dining room or from studying?
Yes. Okay. So I think so many things. There was that sort of that memory of place, and this sort of physical memory. So all of a sudden, I've like studied the maps, and all of a sudden I'm in a vineyard, and like I'll just pick two to show a contrast. One, the largest vineyard that we harvested was called Clos de Forêt. It's a very large vineyard. 2006 was a pretty rainy, muddy year. So I remember like everyone's wearing borrowed Wellingtons that haven't been worn since the year before. So you sort of have caked mud all over them and they sort of fit, but not really. And you're wearing these overalls that you're putting over your other clothes and being in I'm here.
That's okay.
Um,
If you
and
need to go, that's okay. But if I don't mind the noise, that's all right.
you might get a little interruption in a couple minutes.
Okay, no worries.
Um,
So it was raining hard?
it was raining hard. Yes, one second. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Um, so let's see. So that was the sort of most of the experience was just being in the vine and seeing the bugs but then also understanding the slope. Like okay, this one was pretty flat for most of it. It's on a gentle slope, whereas like there was a sunnier day and we harvested Susho, which is in Von Romane, and the slope was completely different and the sun was different. And I remember seeing a praying mantis, but it's just sort of like okay. The sun hits this place differently. The soil drains differently. It's not, I don't need the boots. I don't need the, so like you start to understand in physical terms things that you can read about. But for me, it was just so much easier to understand them while being there, let alone the whole full experience. So it was a 10-day harvest. And at
So this
night,
is the other sort of half, like you talk about soulful wines you feel in your bones, but this is you experiencing the harvest with your bones, feeling it bodily, that slope or the rain hitting you or whatever, like all of that, very physical, as you say.
very physical, and then also understanding how decisions are made in real time because there are a lot of things that would never make it into a book. And in fact, in most wineries, I think pretty much at every harvest, except for one that I can think of, you see things and it's like, okay, hey, we're not going to talk about this outside. And it's nothing secretive, but it's just sort of like wouldn't make sense it's like, oh, in this vineyard, there happens to be a Pinot Noir vine that mutated to white grapes. So there's a fair amount of white grapes in this red wine, and it doesn't matter, but it's also not discussed and it's not talked about. Or let's see, what's another example? You see how decisions are made in real time. Like, okay, it's sunny today, like there's a break in the rain, so we need to harvest Susho because after tomorrow it's going to be too ripe and we can't let that happen. So there's sort of the physical and a logistical understanding of how decisions get made. And then you also see like, okay, in every winery I've worked at, except for one in California, there's nothing added. There's no yeast helpers. There isn't that kind of help or support for the grapes. I mean, I would say like there were a couple of times where like an experiment was taking place, but by and large, sort of like, no, this is just, we sure will experiment because we're curious, but this is how we do it. And this is how we've always done it. And we experiment in different ways, but not with the integrity of the grapes or the process of fermentation. And that was very, very different from the harvest that I worked in California, and also the winemaking course that I took from the UC Davis. And it was just completely different versions of how to make wine, or the winemaking process at my UC Davis course, which hopefully has been updated now. But I remember there was a chapter about fermentation, and I was literally told, well, sometimes people will say that they are not adding yeasts, but that's actually impossible. They're not telling you the truth. It's not even possible to do that anymore because yeasts are so strong that now they're everywhere. So we recommend you come with us to the yeast store. Here, come along, camera, and here are all the yeasts that you can buy. And it was just such a very different, I mean, but not, I mean, that's not, for me, those wines are not the wines that I feel on a cellular level as a sort of, but they are one way of making wine, and they're one way of making a clean wine and a very correct wine that's going to taste, more consistent over time. So I see the benefit. However, the wines that got me excited at the beginning of my career are just have a different approach.
Right. Awesome. So after working at the molecular gastronomy restaurant WD50 with Wiley Dufresne in New York City, you write that it was there you began to consider a life in restaurants and redirected your dreams. What was it about Wiley's approach of valuing curiosity and research that resonated so deeply with you, especially as someone who came to New York City wanting to be a writer?
Yes, I think for me, that was the first time where I sort of saw or felt a familiar, I guess I felt familiarity and aspiration within the restaurant community. Prior to that, I had worked at a restaurant as a hostess and then a manager and a server, and it was sort of a thing that just felt wrong, but it was sort of like, well, I need to pay rent and figure out what the next step is. So it felt wrong, but it was sort of the necessary step to WD50.
Mommy?
Hi, Ronan.
Watching? No.
Hi, my love. My love, I am going to mute one second.
Sure. I had children too once that were young.
Okay. Ronan has taken it upon himself to sneak some chocolate in my absence. He is homesick today for those listening.
My son used to be young too once, but no more. But anyway, so you were talking about life in restaurants, what Wiley had inspired there?
Yes. Yes, well, and I think for me, I was really grateful to encounter somebody who was so smart and so respected, who also had an education that was similar to mine. Because I think at that moment in my early 20s, my education was not feeling very useful, and I remember feeling that through a lot of my 20s. It was sort of like, what am I actually going to do with this degree? You know, like, because you don't learn the skills of working at college by design. You learn the skills of thinking, and that was something that Wiley really celebrated, and that was so, I feel so lucky to have encountered Wiley and WD50 at that moment in my life, because it was sort of like, okay. And to know his path too, like before he could be Wiley Dufresne with WD50 and 71 Clinton Fresh Foods, he was a sous chef at Jean Georges, where he worked with a very classical understanding of cuisine, sort of notion of learn the rules and then you can break them. But it's important to understand on a foundational level, the purpose and the sort of thinking that gets you from this more classical framework to a more creative approach. And that was also really interesting. And so I think seeing Wiley was having a human example of someone who did value these things that I had been taught to value and that I wanted to continue to be able to value, and hadn't found that in a restaurant environment until working there. And this was also prior to Danielle and prior to 11 Madison Park.
Okay.
So yeah, that was
sequence,
sort
yeah.
of pre Danielle, and that sort of kicked off this idea of, oh, wait a minute, there's real craft and history and creativity here, and maybe I'll stick around here for a minute. And it's funny, I had also been in touch with an editor from the New York Times who had, I think I was still living in Colorado at the time, but she was going to publish a article, which eventually I ended up getting a paycheck for, but never published. And then I had pitched an idea, and I was told, like, oh no, I don't think that's going to work. And it was about like various kitchens that I had staged in before taking this job at Danielle, and it ended up that she was like, no, that's not going to work. And then my dad, maybe 2 months later, my dad sends me this article. It was in the New York Times Magazine. He's like, didn't you pitch this article with exactly these same examples and chefs? And it was sort of wild. It was a great moment. It was a gut punch moment of like, oh, this idea was good. And so this person who had the power to take it did. And part of me felt like small and resentful. And the other part of me was like, you know what? That was a good enough idea for an editor of the New York Times to publish that idea. And so my ideas are not bad. And also maybe I don't want to be, sort of fighting so hard to be in this writing community.
I have nothing to do.
Hi, Ronan. Ronan's dressed as Darth Vader now. Hi, Ronan. I know you need to just go, and you can do dress up and playing, but not.
Some of this is reminding me of that BBC reporter whose kid came in midway through. I don't know if you ever saw that interview, and he just ignores the kid. At least you're not ignoring your kids. That was funny.
We had a nice negotiation, so I think we're in good
Okay, good. So that experience with the New York Times, it tilted you more toward restaurants than writing, thinking maybe you could break in more.
Exactly.
It wouldn't be so
Because
hard.
at the time, I was thinking, okay, well, I'm working at Danielle, and this is, I think at the time, a couple years prior, there had just been a book written about the fourth star, is what it was called. And it was like a journalist's account of working in the kitchen at Danielle to see what takes a restaurant from 3 stars to 4. And for me, I didn't want to write that same book, but my thinking was like, where can I learn the most and be as educated as possible? And that place was Danielle, of the places that I visited and got to work in, and it just felt very inspiring to be there. And
Right.
it was while I was in the kitchen that this whole thing happened with the New York Times, which is, by the way, a publication I have a lot of respect for and read regularly. But I think that was a great moment of yeah, just sort of saying, why am I chasing this? Am I chasing this because I decided that I should? And I think sometimes, for me at least, there's comfort in setting a goal. And then it's sort of like, okay, like I used to run cross country, and it's like you have the goal and you run towards it, and you run over streams, and you run, around the trees, and there will be obstacles, and you will not pay them any attention. And I think that was a helpful moment, because sometimes it's time to redirect the goal. And I think that was another, in a weird way, another helpful sign that was like, you're on, yeah, go back to this path. This path is there. That's the green lights. You're getting some yellow and red lights over here. But like this light is, in fact, that same editor I have to thank in a weird way, because I remember she told me, I said, you think you have such this amazing career. Do you have any advice on writing? And she said, yeah, you should like work in an industry for 10 years, and then you should think about writing something.
Wow. Wow.
I didn't really like that advice very much. And then, indirectly, that's what ended up happening. And that sort of indirectly led to Smart Mouth in a
That's
very
true.
serendipitous kind of way.
Well, you've got a great attitude toward the setbacks that you use them to actually move forward. That kudos to you, Jordan. And now you're in the New York Times for your book. All right, let's talk about this. You passed the Master Sommelier blind tasting exam on your first try, which is extraordinarily rare given the pass rate's about a dismal 10%. What do you think was the key to that success? Was it just studying and tasting a lot, or were there some other things you did or examples you can share that really helped you nail that?
Of course. So the first most important thing is that I failed tasting on my advanced exam. And I thought of myself as a pretty good taster. And so I went in and I
So this is the level below Master Somm, right?
exactly, it goes
Right. Okay.
certified or intro, certified, and then there's a real jump up between advanced and then master. And
Okay.
so I had passed the first 2 tests, which
On
each
the
are
master
group
level. Yeah. Okay.
So like I'd passed the introduction, and then a year later I passed the certified, which all of these tests are comprised of 3 parts. There's the blind tasting, the service practical, and then the theory. And fast forward to advanced, and I definitely studied a lot, and I really studied hard and had a great system and all that, and I didn't think of tasting as my weakness. And so I think I don't know, I mean, it's hard to like remember exactly my frame of mind. I'm sure I was certainly nervous, but I think I was nervous with like an underlying confidence that I could get through that, more so than I had for the other 2 sections that I ended up passing. And anyway, I totally failed the advanced tasting the first time. I passed it the second time, but I failed it the first time. And I remember I called Sancerre Chablis, because as I've learned since, the first time you smell something, basically those strong aromas will stay in your brain. But then if you go back and you try to smell them again within the next 10 or 15 seconds, you won't be able to. So I remember like
Oh,
something that was like, so, gooseberry, but then I didn't get the gooseberry, but then I was only getting these other things. And anyway, so I flubbed And as a result, I tried to get really curious about why. I mean, it was another gut punch moment of like, ugh, really? Tasting? And then I asked people who I knew who were great tasters. And one of the people I asked was Bobby Stuckey, who is an amazing human and master sommelier based in Boulder, Colorado, was very much an early mentor to me. And Bobby has been definitely, I tasted with Bobby in those early days, and Bobby said to me, he's like, you know who taught me to taste is a guy named Jay Fletcher, and he lives in Aspen, and he's very talented. And I remember I don't know how I got on his radar, but I'm sure I just went up to him and I was like, look, I know that you have mentored these 4 mentors of mine. They all speak really highly of you. I will, if I can get myself to a place and a time that's convenient for you, would you taste with me? Would you give me some pointers?
Good for you.
And he said yes. And so my family is still in Colorado. So I think I would go up on like Christmas holiday or like times where I was in Colorado. I would see if he was available. And long story short, he approached tasting in this totally different way, which is the way that I like to think of it now. And it's just a game of logic, basically. So it's sort of like, okay, when you know, and of course you have to have an understanding of the broad strokes of things, but like, I remember a revelatory moment was we were tasting Pinot Grigio. I didn't know what it was at the time, but he was like, well, smell it. Does it have oak? And, oh, all right. But it was like, it sort of smelled not brioche, but like, yeah, like that sort of bready, like white bready. And then it was textural, but it also wasn't like textural in the way of like a beautiful rounded wine from an oak barrel. So it's sort of like understanding, okay, well, this wine doesn't have new oak. It doesn't have any oak. It doesn't smell or taste like oak. And yet there's some texture. Okay, it's Pinot Grigio because it is light pink in color. If you look at it compared with these other white wines, there's a light pinkish hue versus a greenish hue or a yellowish hue. That's sort of clue 1. Clue 2 is it's textural, but it's not fulfilling. It's sort of, how do wineries that are not investing in oak barrels get texture? Will they just leave their wine in contact with the lees for a longer period of time?
The spent yeast cells, the leaves that have died out. Yeah.
Exactly. So just starting to get a handle on those sort of tactics. Oak is expensive. A new French oak barrel is €1,000, which depending on the exchange rate is between, what is that right now? Like almost $1,200.
Yeah, mark it up 30% for Canadians, but it's expensive. Yeah. Yeah. So he was really going deductively, like just look at all the clues, almost like Sherlock Holmes kind of.
Exactly.
How can we break this down to come to a conclusion?
And that was exactly it. And even like, tasting wine, like for tannins, like getting a sense of the nuance of tannin, like low, middle, high. What about medium plus versus high? So like you sort of you trap a little bit between your lip and your gum, and you can just, it's unmissable. A high tannin wine is unmissable when you start to do that, and you do that enough times and you get enough reps under your belt. So part of it was the right thinking and the right process, and then the rest of it was just enough reps, and enough of that was what led me to have success in the tasting exam when I ended up taking it at the master level.
10,000 hours of practice. That's Malcolm Gladwell. But going back to that first thing you said, I thought that was really interesting because, when you smelled the wine first, you had one impression. 10, 15 seconds later, it didn't smell the same because you had accommodated to it. The way our brain works is that, when a new sense or smell comes into our environment, we say, okay, that's what that is. And then we move it to the back because we couldn't possibly keep processing if we were trying to hold all of those senses at once. So to me, that makes sense scientifically, but also it says trust your gut, like your first impression, like don't dismiss it because it may not be back again either, especially when you're smelling wine. So that's a really cool, I'd never heard anybody talk about it that way. So that's really neat. So you passed the tasting and the written, but then there's the third component, which is the service in the master sommelier, where you come out and serve judges as you would in a restaurant. And you write in the book that, so you were so close to earning this coveted designation, why did you stop? You write in the book that the judges felt during the service exam didn't seem like yourself, despite the fact you felt you were feeling confident. So what was going on, and how did you feel about that feedback?
Yes. Okay. So this was now they've changed the order, but when I took the exam the first time, the way it used to be, and when I was going through this process, you have 3 tries to pass all 3 parts, and it didn't matter. Now they sort of like to gatekeep with the oral exam, the theory. So it's like 100 questions, and you're in a room and answering them, and that I also ended up passing. But what I found so interesting as a result. All right, so first time I passed the master sommelier tasting, and I don't pass the other 2. And then the second time I study a lot, I'm much more focused, and I still don't pass anything. And that was so helpful. I mean, the not passing is the best feedback, because I was given good feedback in that it was like, well, I ran out of time on the decanting table, and I did not have a big arsenal of Spanish dessert wines, and I needed that. Like, it was a Spanish restaurant, which I had not prepared for that. I was ill prepared, and so the feedback was study harder, learn more, memorize more, do better, like tune out. And I was also not working the floor as much that second time that I took the exam. The third time, which was the sort of the final time, either you pass or you reset, and then you lose the credentials that you've earned. So this was my very final time. And at this moment in time and in my life, we had just opened Momofuku Co, which was the tasting menu. We had moved Co from the original location to the new location, which was at Extra Place. And Dave Chang's mandate to me was, build me a great wine program. I don't care what the expense is.
Wow,
I want
what
it to be
fun.
great. It was so much fun. You know the rules, now break them. That was his mandate to me. And so I was on the floor, and in fact, Bobby Stuckey and his amazing wife Danette came in. They were in town for, I think, the Beard Awards, and Bobby had the tasting menu and the pairings, and he said afterwards, what you are doing here is the most important menu right now. Like, this pairing, I'm telling everyone to come here. And it was something I was very, very proud of. At this point, I had worked on the team as part of the team at 11 Madison Park, where we had won the best wine service, and I had a lot of experience working service. And I think, and again, it's like reps, and it's like, are you comfortable? So because of my life in that moment, I was extremely comfortable in service. And then the other part of it is, okay, well, great, you're comfortable in real service, but this is like a pretend service obstacle course. So are you prepared for that? And I remember, like, this is when I really started visualizing. So like every night before I'd fall asleep, I would think about, okay, do I have a full menu of wines from any country that anyone could possibly ask? And I was prepared, back, front, left, right. And then, hold on, my other son is here. Okay, and now the door is shut, so we're really in good shape. So let's see. So basically, in that final iteration, I passed all the questions. I answered them correctly. I had fun doing it. I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this is so crazy, because usually I sort of know, like, right away if something went well or if something went poorly. And
Okay.
the first 2 times I took it, it's like, oh dear, I didn't remember the producer of the Barolo they asked about. I hope that they don't notice. Okay, it's dinner time over here in Paris, and and anyway, so yes, hold on, Ronan, I'm going to shut the door. Okay. Anyway, so this was the sort of opposite experience. In fact, I was worried about theory, even though it was easy, and I felt like, okay, those questions sort of flew by and it felt easy, but who knows, you just never know if what you say the answer, but they're looking for something else. And anyway, when the feedback came, so there were 3 tables at any given service practical. There's the sort of mystery table where you correct a wine list, and they have like they have a Premier Cru vineyard listed as a Grand Cru, or they have the wrong producer with the wrong vineyard, and you just have to sort of know these things. And that was an easy table. And then there was the decanting table, which I remember was very challenging, but I passed it. And then the champagne table was the table that I ended up not passing, according to the court. And it was a table full of people who have never seen me ever. They don't know me. They've never seen me work in a restaurant. They didn't, like, this particular group of people didn't work in restaurants themselves. And if they had, but prior, it was not, these were not people. It was just sort of interesting. It's like, okay, these are people who don't even, yeah, like they're not people that, it's not like Bobby Stuckey saying you didn't do a good job with service. It's
Or
people
that
who,
you're not yourself. I don't know how people who don't know you can say you're not yourself.
well, that was why it was a gift in the end, because it was so
Another
absurd.
gift. Wow.
It really
Yeah.
was, because it was so ridiculous. And I remember calling the guy who was in charge of the court at a certain point and was like, I don't know what to do with this feedback, because the other times that I've taken this exam, I've taken this feedback to heart and it's made me better. But I can't do anything. I can literally do nothing with this feedback, because I felt very much like myself, and also it was just for me it felt so arbitrary and so
Yeah.
ridiculous, that sort of like, wait, I can't invest any more time in this, because I could nail every single exam, and there's always the possibility that somebody who doesn't know me decides, yeah. And actually it was yeah, it was a woman who I think, her sort of identity was this title, and so I think maybe that was part of it. She was the one who delivered the news, but it didn't
Wow.
matter. In the end, it resulted in a different direction, which was very, very liberating.
Again, you handle the setbacks as motivation. So kudos to you, Jordan. So let's get on to your book, of course, Smart Mouth and the Wine Philosophy. Now, I love this title, Smart Mouth. It's playful and confident. How did you come up with that?
My goodness, this was a group effort. There was a sort of working title, and then it was actually the team at 10 Speed. I would love to say I came up with this title, but the second I heard it, I was like, yes, that is the title. My dad used to call us smart mouths when we were little, and
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it just sort of encompasses what I hope the spirit of the book is.
Yeah, because and it's about tasting, and that involves the mouth. What was the working title?
I think it was like how I don't remember. I don't remember, and whatever I say is not going to be good. So
Okay, probably more pedestrian. So you start the book with tasting rather than history, regions, or grapes. Was that because you wanted to get right into the sensory experience rather than maybe some of the drier knowledge, or what was the thinking there?
okay, so it was exactly that. It was sort of like, okay, wait a minute, why are people picking up this book? Or if they, and that is also the question that I get asked the most often, is like, oh, hey, I had this wine that I liked, and like, why did I like it? Or how can I
Yeah.
find another wine like this? Or, oh, have you ever tried this? I really loved it. And so I think for me, I thought of that as the most empowering way to approach wine. Whether you're new to wine or more familiar with it, it's sort of like, okay, why is it that we resonate with the things that we do? And then the other thing I hoped to do with this book is sort of peel back a little bit. This idea of like what resonates with us is almost always a value system as well. So
Yeah.
sort of trying to yeah, just give people more tools to think about their own value system in regards to wine.
And I love that you say delicious is personal. How does that square with the fact that the wine world, especially, is full of scores and ratings and sommeliers and designations and all kinds of tiers and caste systems from the 1855, whatever? How does that all go with the delicious is personal?
Yes, because it really is. And the other thing one other little interesting tidbit I uncovered while researching this book, we all have between 2 and 10,000 taste buds. So there are a lot of taste buds, but some of ours work and some of them don't, and they're all configured differently. So our appreciation for what is good and what is delicious is as individual as a fingerprint. And so that for me was a good reminder that my husband, who is extremely knowledgeable about wine, we went on a vacation over the summer that celebrated our wedding anniversary of 17 years. And it was like the
Congrats.
night of, but we had two different wines. Like I wanted this wine from Liguria that I love. It's not a fancy wine. It's an excellent wine. It's a Ottolenghi Lambruschi Vermentino. And we had actually had a different bottling from him like earlier the prior day. And he was like, no, this is a very special moment. I want to drink a more special wine or a fancier wine. And so I think so then we had two different wines. It was like his wine was perfect for him and mine was perfect for me, and nobody's wrong. But and that was, I think, I think growing up, in my career while dating and then engaged to and then married to somebody who is so opinionated and is so educated about wine, I think that is what made me want to make sure that I really believed in my own opinions, or that I knew where my opinions were coming from, and I wasn't just sort of borrowing somebody else's because and so that, I think, is the other piece of this, where like it's such an American invention that like 100 points, or this is good and therefore it's collectible, and that is not good because I said so. And so then I think that's another version of rugged individualism / a lot of ego, and that for me, I mean, I think we're seeing it in the wine world at large right now. Like there's so much pushback against that right now, which I think is really healthy.
Yeah, that's true. And you mentioned a winemaker in Burgundy, when he tastes, he sees shapes and colors. Master Som, you mentioned, envisions types of flooring, which I found intriguing. Like, what are we talking about? Hardwood versus laminate when he tastes wines?
And it's a she, and I have
That's
no
a she.
idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm glad I asked her, because it was like the weirdest answer I could have possibly ever imagined. So
Yeah.
okay, this is going to be good, because it's a good reminder that everyone approaches just even this process differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you create a persona-based language for wines by comparing them to celebrities, which is lots of fun. Rioja, Spanish Rioja reminded you of Penelope Cruz. Sauvignon Blanc from Sancerre reminded you of Gwyneth Paltrow as lithe and steely, full of resolve. Were you trying to make wine more relatable? And if so, what comparison might you make today?
Oh my goodness. All right. And I also want to say that all of that sort of, those connections came back in my very, very earliest days, like pre-WD-50. So that was like when I was sort of trying to understand wine and then sell it by the glass to people who came in and wanted to sort of like, hey, should I get this Rioja or this, Sangiovese? And I think I needed,
A hook.
needed
Yeah.
a hook and
A relatable hook. Yeah.
exactly, and a framework. And so that, it's so funny. I don't think of wines in that way in terms of celebrities anymore, but it really worked at the time, and it definitely resonated with other people. I think like that's been, that kind of creative approach has been drilled out of me a little bit with but I still think about it. I guess now I think about how it feels like when I'm like, so I think it's a mix of, I don't know how to answer this question thoughtfully, because or just correctly, because I think that was like how I started, and then once I had more tools, then it was helpful, because I sort of didn't have tools, and so it's like, well, what do I have? I have celebrity reference points, so this is sort of behaves this way and this one behaves that way, and creating enough differences in language for that. And now I think of it, I guess I do sort of think of them, there are personas to wine. I just don't attach names to them, maybe. But I think, right, some are elegant and some are more subtle and some are more bombastic, and like that kind of framework. But I think
Sure.
when I'm tasting, I really am sort of analyzing point by point. And the Chambel Musigny winemaker, he's one of the great winemakers. I won't name him, but he's like, his wines are extremely collectible, and it was so interesting to ask him that question and have him share this. And it was, I don't know, just another good reminder that everyone can have their own approach, and we do, and it works for us. And this sort of notion that an expert knows and you don't is, I think, not a very inclusive way of thinking about it.
That's true. Now, you break down very helpfully the acronym TAL, tannins, acid, alcohol, and length, for understanding wine structure, because structure seems like such an abstract term when it comes to wine. We think of it, it's liquid. What do you mean by structure? So, why does understanding structural components like tannin, that furry mouth feeling, walnuts, oversteeped tea, acid, the mouth-watering, alcohol, the heat, length, how long after you swallow it, the finish comes back to you, the perception. Why are these important, these structural components? Do you think they matter more than identifying that wine's from Burgundy, that wine's from Bordeaux?
Well, and I think so much of those are part of the same conversation. Like a Bordeaux is going to be a Cabernet or Merlot with other blending grapes, Cabernet Franc, maybe, if you're talking about Cheval Blanc, but a sort of thicker skinned grape that is going to have more tannin, that's going to be darker. The tannins have to be managed differently because the skins are so much thicker. The acidity is a different scenario. There's, just the climate is different, and versus Burgundy where it's a thinner skin grape, but it's Pinot Noir, and even though it's a thin skin grape, it still has a lot of tannin. Like I remember being shocked the first time I really started to understand, like, okay, wait a minute, this wine from the Rhone Valley, here's a Syrah from Hermitage, and which I always think of as a big full-bodied wine because it's almost purplish in color. There's always a tiny purplish hint to Syrah. But when you are tasting these wines side by side, there's a lot more grip in a Pinot Noir. And it's not better or worse, but it's just sort of different. So when you're thinking about, okay, do I want to sip on this wine, or do I need some snacks to have nearby while I'm sipping on it? Or is this really like a sort of wine for dinner versus a wine for apéro? And also like, well, what am I having for dinner? And so there's the interplay, there's the flavor, which is very much part of the aroma. It's like we forget that smell and taste are basically the same thing. So without smell, there is no taste. So that's part of it. That's almost like the flesh, but then you have like the bones, the skeleton, and that is the tannin structure. And then, what are the tannins like? If it's high tannin but a thin-skinned grape like Sangiovese or Nebbiolo, that's such a different mouthfeel than Cabernet, which is more luscious and big and juicy, and usually there's more alcohol. I mean, Nebbiolo also has a very high alcohol, but that's sort of once you get to understand the profiles of, for me at least, of these grapes, it sort of opened up this world, and that's where the game of logic came in, where it's like, okay, wait a minute, Nebbiolo's always high acid, it's always high tannin, and it's always high alcohol because it's really sunny there. You have the rain shadow effect. I mean, of course, there are vintage variations and there are some exceptions to the rule, but by and large, these generalizations are helpful when thinking about what can you expect from Nebbiolo. And of course, then there's also the amazing aromas, the truffle and the violets and the tar and the coffee and the sort of black fruit versus, in Cabernet from Napa, you're going to also have high tannin, high alcohol, but you're going to have a lot less acidity, and the fruit is going to be much juicier, and there are going to be a lot of the sort of greener tones, the pyrazines, so like the sort of green peppery eucalyptus qualities that are going to be delicious in a very different way. And so, okay, thinking about what is the right meal for that versus what is the right meal for building a meal around a great bottle of Nebbiolo, or there are some really beautiful white wines from Galicia, and I'm thinking about that now because I realize we're talking about all these very, very expensive wines, but there are also really, really, really beautiful wines that are not at all that same price point. And yeah, for me, that's where it's like, okay, fish and tomatoes and like the salty ocean, or like this Vermentino. I love, like sometimes I'll make spaghetti alla vongole because I want to have a glass of that wine. But then it makes so much sense with a salty spaghetti alla vongole, and it's just sort of like there you are transported to the Ligurian coast.
So because you know the structure of the wine, you can back that out into what kind of meal or dish to prepare. You also describe a trick for identifying tannins as something readers can try. What is that?
We talked about it a little bit, but it's basically that trapping a little bit of wine between your gum and the sort of back of the front
of your top lip. Your gum and your
Exactly.
top lip right in there. So you trap that. And then what are you looking for?
And then you just sort of like, then you swish it around a little bit and then you spit it out. But
Uh-huh.
then you think about and then you pay attention to like how grippy was it. And you have to
Oh,
do that with a few different times so that you have your reference points. But like Nebbiolo is screamingly high tannin and it just will feel like you have a million little claws inside.
like cotton
Versus
batting or something really drying out?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly, exactly. And
Huh.
then versus like a gamay, which will not do that almost at all. And so if you do that, if, try that with the sort of gamay and Pinot Noir and Cabernet, excuse me, Sauvignon and Merlot and then Cabernet Sauvignon and then Nebbiolo, you will start to get an yeah, these reference points where it's just very interesting. I think for me that was one of those revelatory things where you have to try it a few times so that you understand what you're looking for in your own sensation. But once you have done that, and then another one like that is high alcohol. You can smell a glass of wine with your eyes open, and a high alcohol wine will burn your retina. Like it'll
Really? Okay, if it's close enough, I guess, to the glass.
Exactly, exactly. Like smell that like with your eyes open. But then if you do that with a lower alcohol wine, say something from like a Muscadet from the Loire Valley, and like nothing will happen. And it is sort of wild. Have I got to sort of speak with a couple of different groups of people lately for some different conversations, and we tried that trick, and people are always so blown away, like, oh my
Oh, I
gosh,
gotta
that's
try that.
true. I feel that. You're right.
I gotta try both of those. And I talked to Chris from the UK podcast, Wine Podcast, and for acidity, he says swish it around, and then he kind of like lets his mouth hang open, and how much drool comes out. You know how acidic is the wine. So I love these little tests. It really helps make it more concrete. These
Yes,
abstract kinds of
yes.
concepts. Um, you write about earth flavors and descriptors when tasting wine. For someone who's never tasted forest floor in wine, how do you get them to recognize these flavors that, again, seem so abstract? I mean, I know we can go to the forest and smell it, but are there any other tricks?
Okay. I think, let's see. For me, I guess a part of it is I grew up in Colorado, like in the mountains, and we would hike all the time. And so I think it's almost like that smell of like being in the like to get more specific, it's like being in the fall, like in the forest. If you're on a hike and it's just rained and like there's a bunch of aspen leaves on the ground, or sort of like big leafy leaves, versus if you're hiking and it's a like you're in a wetter, more sort of humid place and there's lots of moss, and that sort of there's like that smell of moss, which is like a little bit green and leafy but also a little bit wet and damp, and there are different gradients of that. But I do tend to get that, especially in usually it's like more earth, like wine regions I like to think of as more, yes, earth focused versus technology focused.
Old
And then
world. Okay.
yes, and some of that will also just be from like the cellar yeasts that are in the cellars, but that tends to be in cellars that are not afraid of having old bottles, and those for me are always the most interesting, where you're walking around and like like in the Chauve cellar, or like in Domaine du Jacques, for example, like there are always these walls where it's like or Rouleau, actually, I'll borrow a quote from him. He had a dinner about a year ago with, as he called them, wines you walk by your entire life and think, maybe one day I'll open those. And so it's just, they're buried in sort of, layers of time. And so I think there is a smell to that I associate with older special bottles that are from either cooler vintages that had less sun and less ripeness, or are just from cooler regions where sun is more about the earth versus the sun.
Okay. Now you discussed natural wines, and there was something that I have to ask because there's a specific type of neurotoxin preservative that can legally end up in natural wines. I mean, there's no official definition of natural wines, but low intervention, let the wine do what it wants. That's a whole other discussion. But these neurotoxins can end up being in the wine without listed on the label.
Yes.
And you describe dealing with this neurotoxin requires a hazmat suit to administer. What the heck's going on? What is it, and how can it possibly be in these wines?
I only know about this because of Ramona. So we now make, ever since our first real batch, we moved all of our production to Italy because that's not the case in Italy. But
So you make your own organic Italian spritz called Ramona, drink Ramona.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
so you did
And
that,
now-
and you discovered Velcorin, which is the
Yes.
neurotoxin.
Yes, our Ramona's test batch. So Ramona was something that I sort of had the idea for while I was pregnant with our son Henry. Anyway, the mindset was very much that sort of Momofuku ethos of, you know the rules, now break them and make it delicious but not fussy, that kind of sort of spirit. And so the first batch we made in the US, and I shipped over organic wine from Italy because I knew that we wanted this to be an organic product without any artificial chemicals or any weird preservatives. And on the canning day, I was asked by the winery partner if I wanted to use potassium sorbate, which is a known carcinogen and on the no-fly list at Whole Foods, or Velcorin to make sure that this was shelf stable. And I said, I don't want to use anything. Like I for sure not potassium sorbate. That's a hard no. And I don't want to use Velcorin either. What is that? I've never even heard of it. And they explained it to me as like, oh, it's this miracle and you don't even have to tell anyone. But the best part is it just breaks down to these inert gases. It's great. You just administer it and then it breaks down to inert gases and it's fine. And so we, given only those choices, or else we're not going to can this, we went with Velcorin because that seemed like the lesser of the two evils. It was like, okay, well, I guess if it breaks down to inert gases, but then I need to research this. Anyway, like fast forward an hour, and now we're canning our very first batch on this canning line, and I grab a can because I can't wait to try it and see what this tastes like. And I have this image in my head, and the canning guy grabs it out of my hand, and he says, "You can't drink this for 48 hours, or you could die." And I was like, "What do you mean I could die?" And so, well, it's because of the Velcorin. Like, you can't drink this for 48 hours or you could die, which is true. So anything administered with Velcorin, you can die if you consume it within 48 hours, which is insane. And then, a few minutes later, I see the guy with the hazmat suit walking by, and he's the guy who was administering Velcorin. And so and then I start digging into it more, and it turns out that this whole thing, I don't know who owns the chemical Velcorin. I should look into that. But it's clearly being pushed, and to the point where we then was like, okay, well, we're not ever going to work with this stuff again, so we need to find another canning facility or canning line, and it was impossible to do in the US. The only way was if we bought our own tunnel pasteurization machine, which was going to be like old, used, and over $1 million. Anyway, so instead we were very happy to find our winery partner that we work with now, and in Italy. Actually, Italy was also the first country in Europe to ban glyphosates back in 2016, which is the chemical Roundup, which was initially Agent Orange in the Vietnam War that Monsanto wanted to continue making revenue off of, and then tweaked slightly, repackaged, and started selling to homeowners. And those kind of things, for me, those are such big wake-up calls. It's like right now, of course, we've all heard these studies or these, wine's getting a bad rap of like, wine is not good for you. But it's like, well, Gerard Shaw is in his 90s. He's sharp as a tack. He drinks a whole bunch of wine, but he's not eating highly processed foods. He's not eating.
That's a bigger problem for sure.
When I look at it, that's for me, that's what I believe. I don't know if anyone's seen the Blue Zone.
Where people live to more than 100 years old. Yeah, absolutely. But back to Velcorin, is it harmless, quote unquote, after 48 hours?
No.
Like, I know you don't want it in your drink.
No, it is not. So the chemicals it breaks down to, one is CO2, or the gases. It breaks down to CO2, inert, fine, no problem. And then methanol, which is highly toxic and can create blindness even in small quantities. So they just gloss over that. And it sounds like, as I've learned a little bit more, if it's not administered exactly correctly, another very common side effect are migraine headaches. So a lot of times people are like, oh, I get headaches when I drink wine. And I'm like, oh, cool. What kind of wine are you drinking? It's actually used a lot in Napa. Velcorin is secretly used a lot in Napa. And then a
Astounding.
winemaker friend who works at a custom crush facility or uses the same one as there are a couple of natural wine labels that do also dose with Velcorin.
Huh,
And so
wow.
it's sort of like you have to, like, I wouldn't have known because nobody's advertising this, but it's sort of like this dirty secret that is not talked about and is just glossed over. And yeah, so and for
There you
me,
go.
that's like the values disconnect. It's, I guess we
Yeah.
gotta get out of here. We can't.
Absolutely. Now, I know you have to go prepare dinner for your kids, Jordan. So, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to say, and or what would you want people to take away from the book, Smart Mouth?
Oh my goodness. I hope that anyone who reads it will take away a curiosity and some interesting tidbits. Like internally we were calling them extra pores, but they're in a sort of red burgundy colored font, or Bordeaux or Rhone Valley. They're wine colored font. And for me, I think so much of what makes wine so interesting is the process, the history, the reference points. So I hope that the book is fun to read. I had a lot of fun writing it, and I hope that it is empowering and useful. That is my hope.
Absolutely, and entertaining and in a smart way, for sure. Because you've woven so many nice dinner party stories and tidbits. Even Velcorin, I would bring that up, and the lip tasting and all kinds of stuff. And where can we find you in the book online?
Okay, let's see. So online, let's see. Penguin Random House has it's at
It's on
Amazon.
all the bookstores, I'm sure. Yeah.
Exactly. And then I'm mostly on drinkramona
Okay.
.com is our website for Ramona, and I'm in there. And then also just on social media. I'm in social media as well. So at Jordan Salcito.
Great. We'll put all the links in the show notes so people can find you, the book, and Drink Ramona, your product. Thank you, Jordan. This has been an absolute pleasure. It just flew by like that. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing all these great stories and insights.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience with my colleagues here at home.
That's life with family. All right, I will say goodbye, but don't quite log off just yet. But cheers, Jordan. Here's to your success.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye for now.